Ghosts from the Coast, a ghostly tour of coastal North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia by Nancy Roberts. What happened to Nell Cropsey? 1109 Riverside Avenue, Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Even as a stranger visiting Elizabeth City, you can soon sense the tragedy which occurred there in 1901 is alive today. Tourists stop their cars beside the Pasquotank River and stare over at the white Victorian house with its gingerbread trim. It was once the home of a young girl named Nell Cropsey. Standing on the porch, you visualize her in the living room with her sweetheart, Jim Wilcox, her 5 sisters, and her cousin Carrie. Nell's ghost still lingers here, a young man living in the house says. He has felt her presence on the stairs to the 2nd floor and also in one of the bedrooms. Tree-lined Riverside Avenue is a neighborhood that some would describe as peaceful, even idyllic. But that would not be true, for beneath its calm outward appearance, the currents of the human heart, like those of the river in the front of the house, once ran cruel and deep. This is the story of a girl too brash, too beautiful, and too trusting. The account is based on the court testimony of Nell's cousin Carrie, interspersed with what Carrie's thoughts may have been as she sat on the witness stand waiting for the next question. Now, for the beginning of our story. It was the spring of 1898, when the 16-year-old Nell Cropsey and her parents moved from New York to Elizabeth City. The Cropseys came from a prominent Brooklyn family and were descendants of the early Dutch settlers. William H. Cropsey, Nell's dad, chose the house that looked like a castle on Riverside, perhaps because it was impressive and had a fine view of the Pasquotank River. Bill Cropsey said that he had moved from the area to farm and trade. Nell was one of 6 girls in the family, and, according to most people, she was the prettiest. Even before the Cropseys moved to Brooklyn, she was much admired, and when she arrived, the Elizabeth City girls were impressed with how Nell kept up with the latest New York styles. By early summer, Jim Wilcox was calling on her about 3 times a week, and Nell, only 16, was probably flattered by Jim's attentions. This must have given her confidence in the new town where she must make friends, although the son of the county sheriff was really not her equal in family background. When Sheriff Wilcox went out to investigate a crime, his son undoubtedly went along sometimes. When they arrived on the scene, they might find an accident, someone who had been blown away with a shotgun, or a victim of a drowning. It could be anything. Sheriff Wilcox had grown accustomed to seeing the ugly, brutal side of life to which the rest of us are seldom exposed. Nell's parents may not have fully approved of Jim Wilcox, but Nell was a young girl, used to having her own way. After all, she didn't hesitate to go out for a walk with a boy at 11 o'clock at night. Nell's cousin Carrie would remember the night of November 20th, 1901 for the rest of her life. She was an intelligent girl, and now she was concentrating very hard as she gave her testimony before a packed courtroom. She had been asked to describe Nell and Jim's courtship. When Jim wasn't working, he would take Nell riding and sailing. The first Christmas he gave her a dish with a silver handle, and the second he gave her a gold pin with a setting of stones. On her birthday, he gave her a ring on which she had her initials cut. That was the second summer Nell and the family went to Nag's Head, and Jim made several excursions down to see them. It was one of those evenings when he and Nell were sitting out on the porch that her sister Ollie overheard them having a quarrel. Nell said angrily, "If you're going to act like this all season, then you can just stay home." Carrie had always wondered if that had not been the beginning of Nell's feelings changing towards Jim Wilcox. She did not know what he had said that night at Nag's Head to anger Nell so, but later she would think that she did know, and it would make her shiver. She continued her story to the court. "I first met Jim in September of 1901, when he came to the house to call on Nell. When I came the second time, and Nell and I were walking home from town, we passed the railway. Jim saw us and came across to speak. We were talking, and suddenly I noticed Nell had turned on seeing him and walked way off, looking in the other direction. They didn't speak to each other at that time. It was not until several days later when he came to the house, and then he came right often until fair time. They were very friendly at the time of the county fair. Then the temperance meetings at the church began. Jim was not interested in attending, but he was wait outside and walked Nell home after the meetings. Carrie's thoughts raced as she waited for the next question. It may have been during the meetings that Nell, for the first time, began to see Jim more clearly, and decided that she wanted to break off their romance. But she probably was not experienced enough to know how to do it, and not hurt his pride. It was too bad that he had overheard her making fun of him. Carrie went on with her testimony. One Monday afternoon, Nell and I were walking home from town, and Jim came toward us from the railway where he had worked and walked along with us. Nell didn't speak to him, and when we got home, she walked ahead into the house. Jim asked if I would go with him to the skating rink, and I told him yes, I would go. On Tuesday night when he came to take me, he rang, and the girls said, "There's Jim," but none of them would get up and go to the door. I said, "Girls, I'm so tired of rude manners," so I let him in and went up to get my hat and coat. We stayed at the skating rink for about 45 minutes, and then we went up Poindexter Street to get some fruit. On the way home, because of the way Nell had been acting towards him, I said, "Jim, why is it Nell dislikes you so much?" He said, "You tell me and I'll tell you." I said, "You've had a quarrel, haven't you?" And he said, "No, she doesn't like me enough to go to the door with me, and I'm going to drop her." I said, "You mean she will drop you?" And he said, "That's about the size of it." He was quiet all the way home. There was a question from the clerk of court, and I happened to think that by repeated small humiliations, Nell and even her sister seemed to be purposefully hurting Jim's pride. I guess that was one way out of it for Nell. A more experienced young man than Jim would have seen she was losing interest and stopped calling. His sarcastic remarks and retreats into silence made me wonder whether Jim Wilcox would take rejection well. I continued my testimony. When I got in from going ice skating with Jim, I found Nell and Ollie. Nell said, "I certainly would enjoy a good apple." And I said, "Where's the fruit, Jim?" He said, "It's in the sitting room. It's yours. Go get it." It was passed around, but when I got to Nell, after just saying she wanted it, she said, "No, thank you." After a while, Jim went home. I thought Nell had gone from tolerating him to purposely trying to insult him. Just after he went out, all of us began to laugh, and I said, "Nell, I had to laugh at you once you refused that apple, because I knew you wanted one. She was eating it when I got back from the door." I said, "Nell, you certainly ought to have seen us at the rink. We looked so funny. I am so tall and Jim is so short. I felt like an elephant going there with that little thing," she said. "Why don't you just call him Squatty?" We sat and talked for a while before we went to bed. For some reason, Nell's description, Squatty, Squatty, kept going through Carrie's mind over and over. The next day, Nell's sister, Let, and I drove her to town. Jim saw us and walked up when we were ready to leave. Let said, "Why didn't you come over and harness a horse for us, Jim?" And he said, "I have played lackey long enough." He got up in the back of the buggy. Staring at me, he said, "You are a nice girl in a very cold sort of way." "What's the matter, Jim?" I asked. "Listeners never hear any good of themselves," he said. "As I left last night, my cigarette went out and I stopped to light it, and I heard what you said." I said, "I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings." Jim Wilcox had heard me call him that little thing, and heard the girl he had dated for 2 years say, "Just call him Squatty." He shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, Jimmy doesn't care," he said. But I think he really did care. Any man would have. When we got home, he went in with us, and Nell was playing with the harmonica, so I played the mandolin. Nell said, "We will have fun on the Old Dominion boat. We will play and then pass the hat around." We laughed. Jim suddenly left. I think we were probably unkind to anticipate our pleasure on the trip we were going on without him. Nell seemed to enjoy the remarks of this sort. About 8 o'clock that night, November 20th, he came back. Everyone gradually went out until just Jim, Ollie, Nell, and I were left in the room. I noticed how quiet he was. Once he was smiling. I said, "What are you smiling at, Jim?" He said, "Was I smiling?" I didn't know it. And then he said something about drowning. He told us he was nearly drowned one time, and what a fine sensation it was. Nell said she would never want to drown, as all her hair would come out and she would look like a fright, and she wanted to freeze to death. I thought that an odd comment for anyone her age to make. Carrie concluded her testimony. I said some nonsense, and in a little while I went upstairs. I remember it was a bright moonlit night, minus the room over the sitting room, and the shutters were open. In about 20 minutes, I went to bed. What happened next is filled in for us by Nell's sister Ollie's testimony. At 11 o'clock, Jim Wilcox took his hat from the rocking chair and stared out. When he got in the hall, the door was partly open. He walked out and said, "Nell, can I see you out here a minute?" Nell had looked at Ollie but said nothing and gone out into the hall with Jim Wilcox. She was never seen alive again. This was the first time she had gone to the door with Wilcox since November 7th. although he had been at her house every other night. Ollie thought her sister had gone upstairs ahead of her. Carrie heard Ollie come up and did not wake again until she heard a terrible confusion of voices outside. Nell was not in her bed, nor could anyone find her in the house or outside. The river was dragged, but Nell's body was not recovered. It was found several weeks later tied to a stake floating face down about 50 yards from the shore, almost in front of her home. Although many people thought Jim Wilcox was guilty, and he was sent to prison, he steadfastly maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. It is hard to look at this town today and picture its saloons and lawlessness in 1901. Nell Cropsey went out alone after 11 and was never seen alive again. The son of the family now living in the Cropsey house believes that the spirit of the dead girl sometimes walks behind him up the stairs to the second floor, and he has felt her presence in his room. "It is a sad spirit," says he. "I hope that one day Nell may be freed from this house and from any memories of the night she was murdered a century ago." "Can you tell me who killed me?" the girl who plays Nell's ghost asks in the annual October Ghost Walk drama, as she ascends the inside stairs. If the old house knows, it does not answer. Jim Wilcox was convicted, served his time in jail, and later killed himself without telling whatever he knew. Some are uncertain even today that the right man was sentenced. All anyone knows is it would take the most callous and cruel person to strike this girl a blow on the forehead and toss her body into the Pasquotank River. There is more than one lesson to be learned from the story of Nell Cropsey. According to a quote from the book Into the Sound Country by Bland and Ann Carey Simpson, mothers have cautioned their daughters in the years since the crime to make sure their date sees them safely into their own house, lest you wind up out there dead in the Sound like Nell Cropsey. But somehow, the words of the ghost of Nell still cry out for the answer to her tragic question. "Can you tell me who killed me?"